how much of the substances did you eat when you were doing the show? Like, how often were you imbibing or even just trying?
I mean, as a rule, I would say that I've never reported on a substance that I haven't tried myself.
Why are you so interested in PCP?
Because I think it's I think people, including people that like users, are so easy to manipulate.
I have a friend who's near suicidal, and he had done ayahuasca and Ibogaine, and he was sure that when he did Ibogaine, he didn't do it right. Like, he had gotten all these messages, and it showed him everything he had done wrong, and all he wanted to do was have another shot at it to get it right. You know what I mean? How old were you the first time you did LSD?
Maybe 21 or 22.
Talk about Kratom. Like what's your understanding of Kratom? Have you ever done any Kratom? We are at my dad's house. Hello and welcome to Dopey, the podcast on addiction and dumb shit. My name is Dave, and it's very crazy. We have Hamilton Morris. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Journalist, chemist, television director, television star. What other documentarian?
Yeah.
Your show, Hamilton had a show on Vice called Hamilton's Pharmacopeia, and it started in 2016. And this was a show that I would have loved, but I got sober in 2015. So I think I was so jealous of your show that I couldn't jump in, and I refused to watch it until you agreed to come on Dopey, and I've been binging it since then. It's an amazing show. Amazing show.
Interesting. I'm sort of curious about that.
Come closer to the mic.
That you're saying that like the idea of the show was bothersome to you.
No, I was scared of the show. Yeah. I was jealous of a character, globe trotting, trying all sorts of substances that I wasn't going to be able to do anymore. And also just, I thought it had some kind of parallel with what we did at Dopey. It does, but in a really different way, a much more thorough way, and a much more technologically advanced way, more artistic perhaps than our method. So I want to know a lot of stuff about you. When did you start using, first of all? Does it make you uncomfortable to be on a sort of recovery show?
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
No, and I'm not. I don't have a strong stance on, I'm not pro or anti. I'm very curious about and interested in them, and interested in recovery, and interested in treatment, interested in the whole thing. So I'm not coming at this from a adversarial perspective of
Me neither.
Yeah.
No, I'm so interested in your work and the way you think, and how, jealous is a really easy way to describe my feeling about being able to explore recreationally, intuitively, spiritually, without having any kind of repercussions like the ones I had. But I do not see this as adversarial. I'm super curious about everything that you've done.
It's also very important, I think, to make the distinction between making documentaries about and using. So if you're looking at these documentaries where in some instances I did use typically a psychedelic, it's very different from actual use. It was real, but it's different from the sorts of use that most people are battling in their lives. No one is dealing with a problem with addiction to ceremonial use of salvia in Oaxaca or something like that. So I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, I don't think that I had some kind of privileged interaction with because I got to do them and didn't get addicted, because that was something so separate from actual pattern. I have had problematic relationships with that were completely separate from the show. They were when I was much younger, but so this is not to say that I am impervious to these problems. I just don't think that these documentaries, which were typically about psychedelics, really exist on the same axis as a person's private use of a substance.
Totally. I watched you in a video this morning where you're getting some sort of I think it was on YouTube. It was the world's best
Xenon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was on the Long Island Railroad this morning watching it, and your voice slows down to this great pitch, and then you start laughing. And I'm sitting on the train. I start laughing hysterically. The conductor looks at me, looking at you with the fucking mask on. And it was, I have no like, I'm operating with curiosity here. No, like I have no point of view other than I'm really interested in the work that you do. And I really want to hear about where you had a problem with, because I didn't know that about your story.
Yeah, it was, but yeah, I think the trajectory of my personal use was pretty normal-ish. I smoked weed for the first time in 7th grade and hung out with people that smoked weed and smoked it occasionally. It wasn't a daily thing, and was very neurotic and afraid of so very interested in them. And then when I was, because there's a whole weird kind of backstory with my family where my dad's psychiatrist as a child was a researcher who wrote a number of papers on the dangers of LSD use in children specifically, and this had a huge influence on him that had made him feel that LSD in particular was very dangerous. So he was, even though he's not like really an anti person, he was very concerned about LSD.
Your dad?
My dad was. So growing up, it was always like, whatever you do, don't take LSD. This is one kind of like the thing that's really, really bad is LSD. And
and this is in Cambridge where you started to smoke weed?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think he was also kind of anti-weed as well for very different reasons. Just that I think the kind of sense that it would interfere with academic seriousness and hard work and that sort of thing, which is maybe a legitimate concern. I could see a parent reasonably having that position.
Sure.
And then tried Salvia, which was pretty available at that time, and was so unbelievably amazed by it.
How old were you?
I was probably a sophomore in high school, something like that. So maybe, I don't know, 14, 15.
And tell us
like
the
that.
experience, because I think I smoked Salvia one time.
Yeah, it's interesting because now when people talk about Salvia, it's almost exclusively extremely, extremely negative. Like, I don't almost ever hear anybody say anything positive about Salvia. Everyone's stories are about how they felt like they were being sandblasted or strangled with barbed wire or lit on fire or some kind of horrible thing. Whereas that was not even remotely the case for me. It was extremely interesting and enjoyable. And it felt kind of like that effect where you stand between two parallel mirrors and you see yourself stretching, like infinite repetition of yourself stretching into the distance. Like there's a feeling like that of your kind of dividing infinitely into this point that's beyond your understanding, and it's good. It's like I thought it was a very good feeling, and then when you come out of it, I also felt very good. Like the experience felt very healthy to me, like as if like I would kind of feel as if I'd just gone for a run or something. Like I'd have a big appetite and I'd be kind of warm and sweaty, and I thought, wow, this stuff is something else, pretty amazing.
So how did you get it the first time?
I bought it at a bong type store on probably like Newbury Street or something, or somewhere, in Boston. Bought it at some bong type place in Boston.
Were you alone?
I probably got it with a friend. I got it a few times because I really enjoyed it. And at that time, no one was saying negative things about Salvia. It was weird because not only was I having positive experiences, as far as I can tell, everyone around me was also having positive experiences. Like it was this whole thing about Salvia being the worst, most terrifying just didn't exist at that time.
And you talk about that infinite reflection. That was the first, the feeling of an infinite reflection between two mirrors. That was the first time I've ever heard anybody say that, and it made me think of when I was a kid in this apartment. My dad's bathroom has a mirror on one side, and you close the door and you get that. And I remember seeking that out as a kid, the infinite mirror reflection. Did you look into an infinite mirror reflection when you first were smoking Salvia?
No. I think it organically produces an effect like that. It's a very unusual effect that's not similar to other psychedelics. That's, it also has this odd effect on like proprioception and graviception, where it feels like you're being pulled through things, like your sense of gravity is fundamentally changed. It's really bizarre. I understand why people might not like it. It's not a traditionally enjoyable experience, but I guess like roller coasters aren't either, and people enjoy that. So I don't know. I don't understand why it gained this reputation of being the worst thing. I also don't necessarily think it's something that people should try, but that from those early experiences were pretty astonishing, and it made me more broadly interested in what's out there. Robotripping, psilocybin-containing mushrooms, mescaline-containing cacti, all this stuff. And I was mostly drawn to psychedelics.
So, and this, you're talking about like as your teen years developed, like what else were you into? Were you into music? Were you into like, what were you doing when you were exploring? Like, when's the first time you robo-tripped?
Probably later high school. I did it a couple times. Yeah, but it wasn't, I didn't really become, I was definitely interested in when I was in high school, but I didn't use them all that frequently. It wasn't until I was in college, and maybe I had a year between high school and college, where I became more interested due to all of these kinds of weird things that were happening in my life. I was dating a woman who...
Here, bring the mic closer because I don't want to miss anything.
Yeah, I was dating a woman who was researching Provigil at... Maybe I shouldn't even say what hospital, but at a hospital.
Yes.
And like an older woman. And she had somehow diverted a lot of the modafinil, and so then I sort of became interested in that. And you know, it's when you're first becoming interested in these things, it is a very exciting thing because you're realizing all this potential that exists, all these different types of experiences. For the most part, the experiences for me are positive. A lot of the negative aspects of don't really emerge until you've been at it for a while. That's the kind of typical tendency.
So talk about how, I mean, you became like the Anthony Bourdain of psychedelic all over the world, which is a pretty amazing thing to start from the humble beginnings of Salvia, Robotripping. Yeah. Your girlfriend reminds me of the Ken Kesey story of grabbing, I think, morning glory seeds first out of the hospital that he worked at, right? Isn't it a similar kind of story?
Yeah, well, he was actually like involved in formal medical experimentation.
Testing, yeah. But were you when did you get interested in the history of psychedelics too? Like, how did it open up for you?
From the beginning. I mean, I think that, you know, at that time, and unfortunately to a lesser extent now, there were fewer resources, but the resources that existed were actually pretty damn good. So there was this website Erowid that still exists, that, you know, was really well constructed in terms of it cataloged enormous amounts of scientific information about it, had thoughtfully compiled facts that people had written. There was a lot of writing from scientists. You had all these experience reports. You had a huge amount of information that was geared toward harm reduction and scientific understanding of the substances. So that's a great way to get into that stuff. Like I feel like things are actually worse. Even Wikipedia has been de-emphasized in the Google search ranking, so that it's now, I think, like more use type services that come up when you start to search for. And I think the issue with that is that people are aware that the information is biased and tend not to take it as seriously. Like with Erowid, there was a sense that it was coming from people who actually cared, who weren't trying to scare you, but were genuinely trying to inform you. And so for that reason, the information felt trustworthy, and it was trustworthy. And I think that put me and a lot of people who got interested in around that time in a safer, stronger position to explore things than if they'd only been exposed to prohibitionist scaremongering.
Totally. When we started the show, my friend Chris was a crazy Erowid guy, like the guy who died. He would read all the trip reports. He was ordering, research chemicals off the internet, disassociatives, and our audience loves Erowid. I never got into it. I was more like oblivion seeking kind of addict. I did a bunch of psychedelics, but I wasn't so nuanced in my psychedelic taking. Mm-hmm. I kind of just took whatever showed up.
Yeah.
How does psychedelic, just as you grew older, how did you become more interested in general? Like where does the interest go? Like and connect the dots through the substances a little bit if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the same way that there's, a lot of people that really, really care about music and they dedicate their life to it, but at a certain point, the people that really, really care tend to become musicians, and they tend to learn how to play instruments and learn how to record music and learn how music is composed and gain a deeper understanding of music, just because it's necessary on some level to really understand music. You have to be able to create it and understand how it's made, to really hear it and everything. And the same is true, I think, with where you have to learn chemistry and pharmacology in order to really understand these experiences. And so it's a sort of necessary progression, I think, where you become fascinated and the next step is to learn about chemistry. Of course, there are other things you could, get into anthropology or botany or mycology or a number of other things. But I think chemistry is the science that has the greatest applicability to understanding so many different aspects of use, why certain exist in our society and others don't, why some are expensive and others are cheap. And it really has a huge amount of explanatory value, I think.
So when do you get into the chemistry of it?
When I was in college, and then I started
in Chicago.
Yeah, more so when I transferred to the new school, which had a pretty bad science program, but I could take classes at Cooper Union, and it took summer classes at Harvard, and I was able to then start working at a lab at a pharmacy school in Philadelphia, and worked there for about 12 or 13 years. And that was, at the beginning, it was just on the weekends. Later, it became full time, and so, I did take these classes, but also I feel that the majority of what I learned came from firsthand experience synthesizing. And so I synthesized huge numbers of new psychedelics and learned all about how they're made and analyzed and tested. And that was also, that was great.
That was like a job?
No, later it became a job.
So what was the first psychedelic you synthesized?
I'd have to double check my notebooks, but I think it might have been 2-N-N-DMT.
Okay, and could you describe it? Because I don't know what that is.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is not like a thing that people...
There's people in our audience that know all of it, backwards and forwards.
This is, I would say, even by the standards of someone who's really into this stuff, that would have been an unusual one. And I found 2-N-N-DMT interesting because it had these reports of exerting a selective effect on touch perception. It's like a DMT type compound that supposedly impacts the way touch is experienced. So I thought, that sounds pretty interesting. And it's not a controlled substance, and it's relatively easy to synthesize. And so I synthesized that with the chemist I worked with for many years, and used a known procedure. The chemistry is pretty approachable, I think. At the time, it was probably challenging, but in retrospect, it's like a pretty approachable synthesis.
Give us the layman's, like you got a little DMT, a little MDMA, you stir it in a thing. How do you make it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly happy to tell you. My concern is that
somebody's going to go out and make it?
No, that's not really my concern at all. No, my concern is that it would just sound like gibberish, but I will...
Tell us a little bit, because it's good to know this stuff. There are all a bunch of addicts in the audience. They should know how it comes from.
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea behind the synthesis is that there was this chemist in Kalamazoo named Merrill Speeder, who worked for a now defunct pharmaceutical company called Upjohn, and they were very interested in the synthesis of serotonin-type molecules. This is like around the time serotonin was discovered. And so the synthesis of these tryptamine, serotonin-type things was pretty convoluted at that time, and they came up with a new way of making tryptamines that now bears their name. It's called the Speeder-Anthony synthesis. It was William Speeder and Merrill Anthony. And the idea is that if you have an indole or a substituted indole, there is one position on this ring that is extremely nucleophilic. It's extremely receptive to making a carbon-carbon bond with a different species called an electrophile. And so in this synthesis, the electrophile is typically a chemical called oxalyl chloride, which is like this fuming, most likely pretty toxic liquid that liberates hydrogen chloride on exposure to air and has a kind of it's not the sort of thing you want to use outside. In fact, I used it outside of a fume hood for the first time in my entire life very recently, and I had been so cautious with it in the preceding 13 or so years that I'd never even smelled it before. And working with it outside, I realized that it is, in fact, pretty nasty stuff if it's not handled extremely carefully. So the oxalyl chloride is able to make a carbon-carbon bond with the indole, and then you like one of the advantages of this synthesis is that it's modular, and so you can sort of mix and match the different regions of the molecule, the indole, with different amine of different substituents on the nitrogen. So if you're making DMT, use dimethylamine gas. If you're making DET, use diethylamine, DPT, dipropylamine. So you can choose the substituent based on what amine that you use, and then you add that to this intermediate that would be called an indole 3-glyoxallyl chloride, and you get this other intermediate that's called a glyoxylamide, and then that has 2 double-bound oxygens on the alpha and beta position of this side chain that are then reduced with lithium aluminum hydride in a final step. So that's how it's done. And it's effectively it's technically not a 2-step synthesis, but in the way that it's carried out, it's like 2 steps typically. And it's good. It works. It's nice. It's beautiful chemistry.
I think you were right to warn me before you explain that, because you could have told me anything and I'd have no fucking idea.
It's just like gibberish. It's not. And even that was like, probably like, it's and that's actually one of the challenges, because I do
have some tea. Drink some tea. Okay. Make yourself comfortable. It's a rainy day in New York City. Hamilton came up here. Were you concerned about coming on the show at all? Were you like, what the fuck am I getting myself into? And were you very, very disappointed when you saw how schlocky our spot is?
No, I wasn't. It's a nice place.
Oh, thank you.
I was impressed.
Oh, with my father, my sweet dad?
Yeah.
He makes a nice impression.
Yeah. No, very much not.
I think that when you can be somebody that loves, like you were really interested in psychedelics, do you think you would have been interested in chemistry if you weren't interested in psychedelics?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I was interested in explosives and things like that. And I actually, believe it or not, enjoy making the more than using them.
I believe it.
Yeah. It's like there's a real thrill in it. And I was hanging out with this like crypto tycoon, and he was saying something about like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to have someone that, they would make all of your for you? And I was thinking like, no, that wouldn't be amazing at all, because the fun is making. That's the good part. I wouldn't want someone else to do it.
I imagine there's a feeling of some kind of like power, like superhuman power, like it's the power of creation, And if you're that first psychedelic that you synthesized, did you use it?
No, I didn't use it. This was being done at a university. I had to be very cautious. I was grateful for the opportunity to do these sorts of things, and was very careful about that sort of, because even though everything that we were doing was legal, it still felt as if it was
risque.
Yeah. And technically, I imagine it may have even been legal to consume it. It certainly wouldn't have been explicitly illegal. Maybe it would have, maybe there would have been some university restriction, but broadly against consuming anything that's made in the research lab. But yeah, so this was always done out of a love of learning the chemistry, and then it just kept going, because there's a lot of stuff to make. I mean, there's like the chemical space is virtually infinite. Probably it is infinite. So there's always new weird things to pursue.
I heard you say like there's probably not a you haven't tried.
Oh, I never said that.
I think I heard you say that.
There's not a I've tried the all the like a normal person on the street would have heard of.
Okay, whatever. I'm not making. Are there any? How many have you made? Like, and how often I mean, it blows me away that colleges are just making psychedelics willy-nilly. Is that a thing? Like, if you go to, like, a science department on a campus, they're making fucking MDMA or something?
More so now than in the past, and it should be a thing. I mean, these are very
useful things.
Useful substances that have an enormous potential that hasn't been adequately explored. Like, it's really criminal that a lot of these things are just being discovered now, and we've known about psychedelics for the better part of a century in the United States in a serious way, and it's only now that we're discovering, some of them have this miraculous anti-inflammatory activity or antiviral activity or potential treatment for, whatever types of cancer or any number of things that really should be explored.
I want to hear about the roadmap that got you to Hamilton's Pharmacopeia, and I want to hear about also your early life of using, because you've been described as a psychonaut, which is a very exciting thing to be described as.
Yeah, I would never use that. I find that term.
And hold it closer. I don't want to lose anything.
I find this term annoying. The psychonaut.
Good.
Term.
And you don't like plant medicine. I don't like that term either. I don't like any of this stuff either. Why don't you like it? It's pretentious.
It's pretentious, I feel. And even if it's not pretentious, I just don't like it. It's annoying to me. It's not a term I would use. I almost feel like it's rage bait. It's not a. It's like I see people use it to describe me and then getting annoyed, and it's like, yeah, I would be annoyed too. That's an annoying word.
You think they're setting you up when they call you a psychonaut? They're like, he thinks he's better than us.
Yeah, something like that. Oh, okay, so when you do it, it's a psychonaut, but anyone else is a addict. I think those divisions are stupid as well. So I would never make that kind of a distinction. And I do think that there's such thing as genuinely experimental use where you try things that have never been tried before with an interest in profiling what sorts of activity they have. I don't know that that's better or worse than any other type of use. It's better from the perspective of exploring the psychopharmacological landscape, but I wouldn't use the term psychonaut. It just seems a little annoying.
Before we get to the launch of your kind of high-end career, you were saying when we started that you had found salvia to be problematic when you were a kid.
Oh, no, I didn't ever find a problem. I think what I said was...
You had problems with some kind of...
Oh, yeah. So,
what was that?
Yeah. So it was, much more typical where I, for whatever reason, I had been prescribed Klonopin when I was in high school and used it very occasionally.
Was it probably because you were very anxious and neurotic?
I mean, it's probably just because my psychiatrist was irresponsible.
Right.
But also, I don't want to project blame outward too much.
Let's bash him. That's a good idea.
What is that?
I think we should bash your psychiatrist in high school.
I mean, I do think it's when I try to imagine myself giving Klonopin to a teenager, being like, "Oh, you're nervous in high school? Have these pills."
Yeah, this will make you feel better.
It seems just like a really crazy thing for an adult to do, but at the same time, whatever. I knew. I also wasn't unaware of what was going on.
You hear the siren, by the way?
Yeah, I hear it. It's nice.
It's 21st floor.
Yeah, it makes me feel at home.
I know. There you go. Klonopin as a kid.
Yeah. So, and I didn't really know how insidious benzodiazepines are, that they really have a way of sneaking into your life and pathologizing normal things, like going to suddenly you can't go to sleep, suddenly you have social anxiety, suddenly all these things are like problems that weren't problems previously. And then I got to college, and I remember I had a few moments talking to the same psychiatrist where I realized I became very disenchanted with psychiatry and psychopharmacology and started to realize that this psychiatrist didn't have any tricks up his sleeve. I had always looked at him and thought oh, he's really listening to me, and he probably knows all about all these medicines, and he can probably come up with some kind of amazing combination of that is going to make life easy for me. And I was starting to realize no, this guy doesn't know anything really in any meaningful way that I don't know as a teenager. He's got SSRI, antidepressants, stimulants, benzodiazepines, opioids if someone's in pain. There's no secret that this guy has that other people don't have. And then I started thinking, well, why am I even talking to this guy anymore? What is the point of this? And so I started emailing these Chinese labs, asking them to sell me pure diazepam.
How old?
I was probably 17 or 18, and I found this place in Ningbo, China, that was willing to send me a Ziploc bag full of crystal diazepam, and for some absurdly small amount of money. It was, I think it was 10 grams of diazepam for $100, something that is you couldn't even believe how cheap it was. And it came, and it was real, and what
does it look like? It's just a big bag of powder?
It was a plastic Ziploc bag full of a crystalline beige powder that kind of sparkled, and that had a bitter flavor, and but is not soluble in water, and so I remember I got it, and I was also being prescribed Adderall at this time. This is like really the only time in my life that I was taking Adderall regularly. And I remember calling the same psychiatrist and saying like, oh, I've really figured it out. It turns out that if you combine Adderall with Valium, that solves all the problems. That is actually how you live life without suffering. And he was like, oh yeah, but we kind of tried that in the 1950s, and there were a lot of housewives that got addicted to these stimulant sedative combo pills, and like it's probably not a good idea. And
it's the housewife speedball.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. And of course he was right about that. It is a bad idea and is a recipe for...
It's dangerous, but it's good. It feels good, but then it gets really bad.
Yeah. And yes. Yeah. It's just not a good way to, maybe some people could do that. I can't. For me, even the appetite suppressant effects of taking Adderall daily were enough to be dangerous. If nothing else, just that was enough to like put me in a dangerous position where I lost so much weight after taking it. And I wasn't abusing it. I was taking it as prescribed every day, and even taking it as prescribed at a whatever it was, like 20 milligrams a day dose. It was fucking me up very, very severely. And so I became dependent on this crystal diazepam as well, and used it excessively for about 6 months before I realized that I had to stop. But I was really dependent on it, and when I stopped, it was horrible.
It's one of the worst.
Just crushing anxiety.
How
insomnia.
did you take it? Were you sniffing it?
It's not really better when you sniff it. I was mostly just taking it orally.
Just eating it.
Yeah, like I would keep a bag of it in my pocket.
Like a maid style.
Yeah. So, that was. I don't say that to suggest that I've experienced, this was actually like a pretty confined period, and thankfully I was able to recognize that it was going in a bad direction early because it was so extreme. I think that if it had been less extreme, it may have gone on for much longer, but I was able to kind of nip it in the bud before it got really out of hand. But I learned a lot from that experience, and how pathologizing anxiety is a very dangerous road to go down because it's a part of the fabric of existence. So as soon as you start to think that this is like something that you have to avoid, that's terrible, that you need to medicate away, you're just setting yourself up to be totally miserable.
So once you stopped taking medication for it, how did you deal with your anxiety?
I mean, I think there was a adaptation period. I mean, to some extent, this is one of the lessons that I think a lot of people that are using struggle to get, is that you might start thinking, oh, I can't live my life the way I was living it before. And what you want to say is, oh, I can do all the same stuff that I was doing before without, but maybe you can't. It may actually be the case that once you subtract, you do have to fundamentally change aspects of your life. Like the typical example would be, people that have friendships surrounding like bar culture and bar life who are alcoholics,
sure,
and they have to stop drinking, and they're like, maybe I can keep going to the bar and with my friends, and it will be the same. I just won't be drinking. But what often happens is either it's tempting, or you realize you don't even want to be in the bar if you're not drinking, because the alcohol was the entire thing that made the bar attractive and tolerable. Not the case for everyone. Some people will, still participate in bar culture sober, but this was one aspect. Was like, okay, maybe some of the things that I was doing when I was taking diazepam, they're not even things that I should have been doing. So it's not a question of like, how do I deal with it? It's a question of like, how do I orient my life toward an existence that doesn't even require this? And it might be different. It might not involve socializing in the same way.
How were you socializing pre-diazepam though? Like, what I mean, like, and when do you start to like be like, I'm going to be an expert in this? Do you think? I found that in my own addiction, like I was horribly addicted to benzos. I was horribly addicted to heroin. I was very dependent on cannabis, but its addiction is debated. Right. But I learned like I needed to be about something to get out of it, and like I'm wondering if your chemistry, your visionary psychedelic research stuff was like your identity.
Well, yeah, that's I think another part of it is there's no glory in harming yourself, and it was becoming, with the benzos, it was clear that it was just harmful, and I was interested in all this and wanted to pursue it more seriously, and realized that if I was harming myself, that it would interfere with that process. So that was part of it. But I don't think there was a specific period of thinking like, now I'm going to become an expert. It was more that I found it extremely interesting and thought there were a lot of really good stories surrounding this world, and that crucially it was being dealt with terribly by the media, that the bar was so insanely low, so impossibly low, that anyone could be the best with almost no effort, because everything out there was so fucking terrible.
Right.
And I still feel that way. I'm still amazed, and I almost think like you could consider it inspiring that the bar is so low that there's so much opportunity. This is like one area where people have fucked it up so royally, so amazingly, how badly journalists have treated these issues. I mean, and it's like they just never learn. Like decade after decade, all of the same things keep repeating themselves. These basic lessons are never learned by journalists. And so that was a big part of it, was like, oh, there's all these really great stories. No one is doing a good job telling them. It's all the same scaremongering tactics that have always been around.
Puritanical shit, whatever.
And, isn't this an amazing opportunity to talk about aspects of this world that never get discussed? What
were the first stories, like the classic psychedelic stories, that really interested you? I know you were in love with Alexander Shulgin. Was he the first love of your life psychedelically?
Yeah. And he was the one that really got me interested in all of this. As I read about him before I ever used a psychedelic. There was a profile of him in the New York Times Magazine that I read when I was in high school, and I remember thinking like, wow, that guy sounds pretty amazing.
Tell the audience about him, please.
Yeah. So
and me.
Yeah. Alexander Shulgin was a brilliant medicinal chemist who started out his career working in industry at Dow, and he discovered a successful biodegradable snail killing agent called Zectran, and it was enough of a commercial success that they gave him experimental freedom to pursue whatever it was that he wanted to pursue, and he was very interested in psychedelics, particularly interested in looking at the structure of mescaline and seeing how it could be modified in order to alter the effects of mescaline, because mescaline is a very, very, very weak by weight. So it's so weak that if someone were to discover it now, they would probably just say it's not even active. It's only because of this indigenous tradition surrounding it and its presence in all these different species of cacti that people even think of mescaline as a
right.
Because, it requires hundreds of milligrams. So he started thinking, what can be done to the structure of mescaline in order to make it more potent, and started exploring all these different modifications of the mescaline structure. And he created this drug called DOM that was, at that time, extraordinarily potent. Really
sounds like a hardcore band, DOM.
Yes. And it was, people on the street name was STP.
Okay. And I think that was a hardcore band name. STP.
It was like a thing at one time. It was now no one has heard of STP, but it was like.
I remember hearing that. Anyway, keep hearing.
It's the kind of thing you'd see in like an old book of like users use barbiturates and STP. It's like, but it's very much doesn't exist anymore. It exists in the sense that like the molecule still exists, but it's not.
Nobody's taking it.
No one's taking DOM. So DOM was only rivaled by LSD in terms of its potency. This was like a massive. It was like it was about 100 times stronger than mescaline.
The DOM.
So this was like a huge, huge discovery at that time, and it was enough that I think he just wanted to keep seeing what was out there. And he was very good. He was just a brilliant man, a good chemist, but also just a good thinker, a good scientific thinker, a good writer, a good person, just good generally, very, very funny. And he just kept discovering amazing stuff. He, by himself, working in a lab in his backyard, discovered more things than many pharmaceutical companies during the same period of time. Like he discovered like what to this day appears to be a very promising treatment for Parkinson's disease. He did all this seminal research on MDMA. He discovered probably like 100 psychedelics. He was this, tactile specific psychedelic, auditory specific psychedelics, all kinds of weird stuff. Created the first psychoactive that contained a selenium atom. Weird stuff. And so I was just, and he wrote these two giant books with his wife, Anne Shulgin, who's also amazing and extremely cool, called P-Call and T-Call. And I read those books and was so blown away by everything about him, like how funny they were, how interesting they were, how right they were about everything. Like they really just had such a good attitude toward issues relating to and I felt like their sense of what makes experiences valuable was very constructive. Like they were very into anything that brings people together and facilitates communication and facilitates touch. They were like kind of anti-dissociative for that reason, because they thought the whole thing is like, can we get
together?
Can we get people together to communicate better? And I thought that was great as well. You know, they were also like not really into weed, and so they did have this kind of pure, what felt to me like a very pure, constructive attitude toward these things. And I, to this day, am immensely inspired by them and really think that they were like just great people. And I got to, you know, meet them.
I saw you interview them with much longer hair.
Yes.
And they seemed to really love you too, which was very beautiful.
Yeah.
And was that also, how much weed were you smoking back then?
I was never.
You were never a crazy stoner?
I've never been. I've always been a enjoyer, but never. I was never like. In my entire life, I've been stoned during the day. Like I could probably count on my fingers. Like I was.
But every night.
But yeah. Actually, there have been stretches where every night, definitely. Right. But I've never been like a wake and bake type person. I actually was. You know, people would always say like, "Oh, when you turn 30." Like it's gonna be different. You're gonna start having panic attacks. I used to love smoking weed, but then I turned 30, and then I would think, oh wow, that sounds great. Like I can't wait.
But it didn't happen to you.
I can't wait to start hating it because I'm just enjoying it so much. But one of these days I'm gonna start hating it, and then that day never came. It never got bad, and so I realized, okay, I can't wait for it to get bad. I just have to stop while it's still good, which is much harder. With like the benzodiazepine type situation. It was clear that it was bad, which in some sense actually facilitates stopping. With weed, no bad thing had ever happened, and so I just like completely quit for about 2 years, and then now go use it occasionally.
When did you quit it?
It was around the pandemic. Like it was probably actually started before the pandemic, and then it was throughout that period.
All right, I want to go back to you're falling in love with Alexander Shulgin.
Yeah.
And it's like people, you know what, there are people who fall in love with psychedelics and they never stop eating them. You know what I mean? And they're just eating them all day, every day, and they become maybe real psychonauts, or maybe they become like mentally ill or drifter style or just totally disconnected from the world. And that's not what happened with you.
No, I would hope not. I mean, I don't think I use them enough, if anything. Like, I think that that's a more common issue.
How old were you the first time you did LSD?
Maybe 22, something like that. Maybe 21 or 22.
And did you synthesize it?
No.
Have you ever synthesized it?
No. I've never done any real chemistry related to lysergamides. I've wanted to. I plan to at some point. It's always been on my... I worked with this chemist, Yitka Nikodimova, who's very interested in lysergamides, and so I kind of would let her, or not let her, she was like... I thought like, okay, Yitka will be the one to figure all of this stuff out, and then once she's like figured out a good process, then I'll like join in. But she was also struggling with it. I mean, there's all kinds of it's like a kind of a tricky domain, in part because the precursor materials are expensive and very sensitive to oxygen and light under some circumstances, and purification is a whole thing. And we were working in a lab where there were like people in the lab who were really 100% not interested in, like, if they had ingested LSD, it would have been terrible for them. It would have frightened them horribly. So that's like another element, is you're working with this compound where if like one drop gets on the surface and someone accidentally touches it, it's a whole liability. So there was a lot of issues associated with that chemistry. But so I've never done it. A long answer to, I've not made LSD or anything related to it.
And did the interview that I saw with you and Alexander Shulgin lead to Hamilton's Pharmacopeia?
No, I mean, it was a very gradual thing to Hamilton's Pharmacopeia where, you know, I would write some articles and it became like a monthly column, wrote the column. Then at that time there was the kind of like grand pivot to video that was occurring in a lot of different media outlets. And I was making these videos with this producer, Santiago Stelli, who is really just like awesome to work with. And they were insanely low budget. I mean, this is like, you know, it was shot
like this.
Yeah, it was. I mean, actually, this is probably higher quality than the stuff that we.
This is a really serious podcast.
You know, we were shooting on mini DV tapes, one lens, one camera. Everything is. It was like as cheap as it could possibly be done. And then this was also kind of at the beginning of the idea of like releasing stuff on YouTube, and the stuff was being watched by a lot of people, and it was becoming clear that for extremely small amounts of money, we could make these short documentaries that were watched by tens of millions of people. And so we just kept going with it, but it was very, very gradual. I mean, it was like from the first piece that I made when I was 21 to it becoming an actual TV show, it was probably like 6 or 7 years elapsed between, maybe more, maybe 8. I don't know.
And as you're
Maybe
kind of
more than that.
documenting psychedelics and documenting use, are you coming up against addiction and addicted people, recovering people? Is that a common thing that was happening?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And a number of the pieces concerned addiction, and yeah, I mean, it's something that I would think about all the time. And I think developing a more holistic understanding of addiction, because I think that the kind of typical idea that people have of addiction is like this kind of like meth, not even once thing, where it's almost like a disease that you catch. Like if you try meth, you might become a meth addict as a result of trying it once, and then that will be the rest of your life as like a disease that you caught. And what I saw again and again is that addiction started to feel more and more like a symptom of a different disease, which was deeper existential despair of one kind or another. And, you know, for example, like in it was the 3rd season of my show, there's an episode about methamphetamine, and I'm interviewing this meth cook, and his whole life.
I think I saw some of that one.
Yeah.
You're wearing the shield? Yeah, that was great.
And, you know, this is someone who's like clearly got a pretty severe problem, but as I looked around, you could just see these remnants of the source of the problem everywhere, where it's like, oh, there's the marriage that didn't work. There's the remnant of this, you know, the disintegration of this or that relationship that put this person in a position where they were hopeless and had nothing to live for. And you can almost see how these things emerge in somebody's life.
Well, in that interview with the he's wearing like a mask and his skin is like red. His beard, I think, is dyed red too.
Yeah.
And I could feel almost you being like, I want to help this guy. I want the audience to know that like this is addiction. This is not exploration. Like I could feel you feeling responsible in that piece.
Yeah. And it's a complicated thing for me as well, because I don't want to stigmatize addiction. Like I think that a lot of the stigmatizing coverage is coming from a place of people wanting to help a little bit. Like I'm not going to say his name, but I know a director who made a lot of these like prominent anti-meth PSAs, and he's not someone who's like trying to cause problems. He just didn't.
He didn't get it.
Yeah, he didn't get it, and he's like, oh yeah, if you just show it, like, oh, if you make people feel like, oh, you're going to become a prostitute and it'll be terrible if you try meth, that's the way to do it. But not really recognizing that this potentially promotes like a less compassionate view. And also all these PSAs are funded by people who have no compassion whatsoever and are not really trying to help anyone. So it's like a complicated thing where on one hand you have this kind of like totally non-stigmatizing view, which I think can be like slightly dangerous, where you just pretend that there's no issue whatsoever with anything. Or you go too far in the other direction where you stigmatize things so much that people become ashamed to even acknowledge that they're using these things. They start hiding, they start lying, and you need to find a situation somewhere between where you're acknowledging the harms, but you're not sensationalizing them to such an extent that people hide them and can't be helped.
I feel like there is no answer to it. Like, I feel like everybody's going to try to throw something at the wall to help or to not demonize or to not stigmatize. And it's like, everybody does their best. And like the addict is ultimately responsible for if they're going to use or not use and what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Tell me about how exciting it is when Vice is like, I'm going to send you all over the world to go to, shamanic journeys and different places and really be there in all these really high-end psychedelic experiences.
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting, but I think it's crucial to realize that Vice was just funding these projects that were my own thing. So they weren't like, you're going to go do this. It was like, we'll give you, like, I would ask.
Even better. You're navigating. You directed that whole show.
Yeah, even better. But also, a lot of these things were really hard to film. Like, there's a reason that no one has ever filmed the synthesis of MDMA in a clandestine lab like that before. It's not easy to do something like that. It took a week. It was dangerous for everybody involved in many different ways. And a lot of those shoots were immensely stressful and really came close to not happening at all, or were dangerous in one way or another, and not necessarily dangerous in the way that people thought. Like, people would always say, like, oh, weren't you afraid to be around this or that person? And typically, no, I wasn't afraid of the people, but I was afraid for the people. I was afraid that they would somehow get in trouble as a result of talking to me, which was something that I was very, very scared of. And that was another one of these kind of unanswerable tensions that I had to navigate of, like, okay, there's someone, they're inviting me into their lab where they're making MDMA. And
was that the volcano one?
No, that was a different. Oh, no, that was a different episode. Yeah.
Okay.
They're doing this because they believe in what they're doing. They want to use this opportunity to teach people about the chemistry, but also this could result in them getting in trouble. And they're aware of that. They're making a choice. They're adults. But like, who is respond? Do I not talk to them at all because it could be dangerous? And there was this kind of like weird vibe that I became aware of where people in the world like wanted people to get arrested almost. Like there was like some kind of bizarre schadenfreude where they felt like I started seeing this where people would say that people from my show had been arrested when they hadn't been arrested.
What's schadenfreude?
Like pleasure in someone else's pain. Like almost as if they, that they had like come to love their own oppression, and they like wanted to see somebody punished for speaking out and fighting for freedom. That was like the feeling that I got, and it disturbed me. And this even happened with the meth episode with a different guy, this chemist Uncle Fester, where he was very brazen in doing a lot of things. And then years later, he got arrested for a few different things. One was just like driving with weed or something. And all these people were like, that's what he gets.
Right.
That's what he gets for talking to Hamilton. And it's like, his arrest had absolutely nothing to do with me. He was somebody that took a lot of risks, and the police didn't wait until the statute of limitations had expired on everything on my show to arrest him for something unrelated. But the fact that people were so eager to say that felt like evidence of some kind of weird desire for that to be the case.
It's almost like a violation of the addict code, the manufacturer code, if you tell the story. It's like the magician's secret or something. But I think that telling the story is really important and is missing because these people are making enormous sacrifices to make these available, and they have been maligned by everyone, and they're usually doing something that is good. Like the impression that I've had from most people that I know that are involved in the underground manufacture of is that they're like making an enormous sacrifice in order to do it. And that was another thing that I really felt passionate about, was those stories that I felt no one was telling, that no one cared about somebody that's like involved in the manufacture, that they're just exclusively portrayed as nefarious characters that should get the worst imaginable punishment. Right. It's also what you were doing was you were humanizing these people and telling their story in a way that their sacrifice meant something, and like what was the point? Like what was the first season? What was the episode among those that like stands out to you?
It would probably be the Lazy Lizard episode with Daryl Lemaire, because he was he was like, I think so many people in this world, just a character who'd made an enormous contribution that's totally unknown. So many of his ideas are responsible for getting us to where we currently are. He was one of the first people to really systematically investigate the possibility that psychedelics could be cognitive enhancers in a kind of microdosing type capacity, really ahead of his time in a lot of stuff. He was also responsible for making a lot of the MDMA that was circulating at the beginning. And, this is a name that no one knew, who had done so much cool work and had taught other people how to make things and had really been quietly influential. And you have so many of these characters in psychedelic history, people that made really enormous contributions whose names are totally unknown.
Give us some more.
I mean, one, I can't say her name, but one would be like the woman who, people credit Alexander Shulgin with discovering MDMA. It was actually a woman who discovered it, who doesn't want to.
She doesn't want the credit.
She doesn't want the
credit. How
credit.
did she discover it?
Rachel Newer wrote a great book that goes into it. I'll like defer to Rachel Newer's book to go into that story. I think there is a very interesting story there, but she was friends with Shulgin and was investigating these related compounds because it was a logical thing to investigate. You have this MDA. What happens if you give it a methamphetamine type N-methyl substituent? How will that change things? So it wasn't this like, unthinkable.
No, it was like almost logical.
Yeah, it was a logical step, but she was the one that took it, and she was the one that first.
Now, what about comparisons of you to Anthony Bourdain? If Anthony Bourdain is traveling and eating and greeting and meeting and exposing culture, you definitely did that.
Yeah, I've read some of Anthony Bourdain's writing and I like it. I'm not super knowledgeable about Anthony Bourdain.
What I want to know is how much of the substances did you eat when you were on the path, when you were doing the show? Like how often were you imbibing or even just trying?
I mean, as a rule, I would say that I've probably never reported on a substance that I haven't tried myself, out of an understanding that it's often the case that if you haven't tried it yourself, you won't really know. I mean, there have been so many instances like that where, like, one example would be this called N-DMT fubinica that was a synthetic cannabinoid that became pretty prominent in Russia for a period, and it was being portrayed as this horrendously poisonous that sends people into instantaneous, irreversible psychosis. And, I thought, okay, maybe it's possible. We've heard things like this before. It tends not to be true. And I tried it, and it wasn't true. It was a very, very strong compound. But then the important distinction there is not just that the media was misrepresenting something, but that they're fundamentally misrepresenting the nature of the problem. So when you say N-DMT fubinica, this is so terrible, this is a poison that's circulating, you're not recognizing why is it circulating? Why is this even a that people are using? No one is asking for N-DMT fubinica. That's not like the people haven't spoken unanimously and requested it. Why is it even circulating? It's because of prohibition. It's because of laws. It's because of a lack of regulation. Same thing with fentanyl, right? Like one of the things that doesn't really get talked about with fentanyl is, they've surveyed users. Fentanyl is not a that most people want to use. There are some people that want to use it, but the majority of people,
they want heroin. They don't want fentanyl.
Yeah, they are trying to avoid it explicitly. So what's going on here? If people don't even want to be using it, then how are you saying that the problem is fentanyl? The problem is a system where that is incentivized, where people don't have access to an alternative. And I was, talking with this friend of mine who's working with a test strip company, and even the idea of these test strips is like sort of disturbing to me, because the history of these test strips is they were developed by pharmaceutical companies, mostly for the military, to prevent people from using and to prevent from giving people disability claims or any kind of compensation if they were injured on the job. If you could prove that they had any kind of in their system, it was better for the employer. Like, this was done very much to harm people, not to help them. And of course, they wouldn't say that, but that's what I believe. I think it's a horrible invasion of privacy that's been totally normalized in a way that's like insane to me. You're not even testing someone's ability, just the potential metabolites from a use that could be completely irrelevant to whatever is happening.
But in this day and age, you have users who are terrified of getting fentanyl, so it's like it's coming in handy for these people.
Yeah. Now this thing that was developed by the state to
invade people's rights,
people's privacy has become a tool for self-preservation for other horrible government policies that have incentivized the production and distribution of fentanyl.
Well, did you read the second Sam Quinones book about these fentanyl labs and like why people are dying all over the place because nobody knows how to make it properly or whatever?
I'm very skeptical. I haven't read it, but I'm skeptical of his other claims, which seem
people have issue with Sam Quinones.
Yeah,
I love like the academia of and talking to like Maya Solovitz or Anna Lemke and these people and Gabor Mate and hearing them hating on each other. That's my fucking favorite shit. But in our audience, right? Our audience is a bunch of heroin addicts, and I find that, and we've lost so many because of fentanyl, and then a lot of them have just gone to Kratom, which now I know is called Kratom because I'm listening to you a little bit more. But now there's a whole world. Like we just did a show all around. I'll say Kratom, even though it's uncomfortable for me because I'm
down.
You're down with Kratom.
Yeah.
Either way, it's like. It's this fucking one man's ceiling is another man's floor. It's like somebody who is a heroin addict and is scared of fentanyl is much safer with Kratom than fentanyl, but then they get totally strung out on Kratom just like they were strung out on heroin.
Yeah.
And they go on to Suboxone. And then they can't get off of Suboxone without getting back on Kratom, and it's this, revolving doorway.
Yeah.
And in when you... Because, like, that's what I'm dealing with, or at least I'm not dealing with anything. Like, I'm off of everything for years, and I don't fuck with anything because I'm terrified of anything going wrong with my life. Yeah. But our audience is, like, in and out between heroin, Suboxone, fentanyl, Kratom.
Yeah.
And you know a lot about Kratom.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing you talk about the history of Kratom.
Yeah.
And it was around poppies not being able to be grown? No. Or is that the popularity of it came about?
That would be more with the synthetic opioids like fentanyl, methadone. That was a big aspect of the efforts around World War II to create new opioids that were not based around the structure of morphine. Like, could you create something that had no attachment to poppies that could be made that could exert the same effect? And that was a very successful effort that led to the creation of Demerol, methadone, and eventually fentanyl.
Okay.
Yeah.
And talk about Kratom. Like what's your understanding of Kratom? Have you ever done any Kratom?
Oh yeah.
Do you do a bunch of it?
No.
I've never done it. I don't know what it feels like. And talk about like how does Kratom become something that exists in the gas station?
Yeah, it's an interesting trajectory. So it's a traditional medicine that has a history that spans hundreds of years in Thailand, where it was used the way opioids are pretty much always used as a treatment for diarrhea and as a treatment for pain. And
I never heard of it as a treatment for diarrhea.
That was, I think, actually the oldest documents are about treatment of diarrhea.
It's very effective.
Yeah. Too effective for many people.
Yes.
And so it was a thing, and people would chew the leaves. And although I don't think that natural things are intrinsically better than synthetic things, I do think that the patterns of use that emerge from somebody who's cultivating their own, you have a kratom tree in your yard and you go and you pick a leaf off of the tree, I think it's unlikely that that's going to develop into a life-threatening problem that destroys you because you'll run out of leaves.
That would have been the greatest addiction story ever. Oh, I grew up and I had this kratom tree in my backyard and I couldn't stop eating the leaves.
And they taste terrible when you chew them, and it's it's kind of a self-limiting thing. I actually wonder to what extent opioid problems in the United States would have been as bad as they are if they were even being delivered in a way that just forced you to have a prolonged experience of tasting something bitter. Like, that in and of itself has a deterrent effect, a surprising one. It's amazing how these little things that you'd think would be inconsequential really do.
Explain that a little bit more, please.
Because like ease of consuming something is a big part of it. As soon as you introduce some effort, like it could be something as simple as brewing a tea. like it just makes it that much harder than taking a caffeine pill. Like I know this just with caffeine in my own experience. I'll buy a giant bottle of caffeine tablets. I'll use way more than if I'm having to steep tea bags. It's just easier.
Do you ever buy caffeine tablets?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I consume way too much caffeine
in tablet form.
In tablet form.
How do you get caffeine tablets?
You can just order them on Amazon. I mean, I used to buy like kilos of pure caffeine. I'm one of those people that I have to keep it in line, keep it below 600 milligrams a day. If I don't, it will just go wild. I'm an enjoyer of caffeine.
No, I like caffeine too. Yeah. I didn't know you can get it as a tablet capsule.
It's probably better to avoid it because it's, then you put them in your pocket, you take them all day. It just becomes easy to inadvertently consume absurd quantities of caffeine. I've always been like, again, I would say simultaneously that I consume too much caffeine, but also that I keep it in check. I've never gone crazy with it.
No, it seems like you keep everything in check, which is why you're able to do this work.
Yeah, I try. But so with the Kratom, so the traditional use, it's not really associated with any major problems because of the self-limiting dimensions of picking a leaf off of a tree and chewing it and it's bitter and whatever. But then information about the activity entered the ethnobotanical literature. There were some articles about it. This was around the time that the internet was globalizing the trade in the early 2000s, and so there was interest in different medicinal plants from around the world: Kana, Kava, Kratom, Amanita muscaria. Suddenly you can buy all these things on the internet. So a lot of these early ethnobotanical vendors sold it. So I remember I first tried it probably 2007, 2008, sometime around then. And I was actually kind of anti-opioid. This is like a whole side thing. So I was not really drawn to opioids to begin with. And my girlfriend at the time and I made tea with it, and I drank it. I actually really enjoyed the effect. She was horrendously sick from the same amount and was vomiting. And I remember seeing her and thinking, oh, well,
I don't want that.
Fuck this. Like, this is horrible. She's sick. This is a horrible sort of tea. Like, this is not something to pursue at all. So that was essentially the last time I did it. And at that time it was, no one had ever heard of it. And so I thought this was just the kind of thing that people who, the sorts of people who buy research chemicals and are like really, are on Erowid, like those kinds of people would have heard of it, but a normal person would have never heard of Kratom. And then, it was a very gradual thing where, then you started seeing these reports of people saying, oh yeah, I am actually using it every day. It's great for my back pain, whatever. I might be dependent on it, but it's better than this or that, better than poppy pod tea, which was actually the thing at that time. I don't know if you are aware of that era.
I mean, only from listener emails and voicemails where they're like out in Washington picking poppies and making tea.
Yeah. So there was a period where that was the thing. That was kind of like the thing people would order.
You didn't like opiates. Did you ever try poppy pod tea?
I did try it, but I had a friend who was into opiates, and it was clear to me that from watching him that there was something slightly dark about it. And so I was always much more cautious about it. So I tried it. I never got into it. But so that was the thing for people that wanted to do technically an opiate. They would have ordered dried poppy pods at that time. Kratom was like its own kind of weird thing for more experimental people. Then the dried poppy pods became less available. Kratom gradually became popular enough that some entrepreneurs decided to build businesses surrounding the import of large quantities of Kratom from Southeast Asia. It's very cheap and started to catch on. Kratom bars emerged, various branded Kratom products emerged, and it got to the point where every bong store would have a Kratom extract of some kind.
Have you heard about these like Kratom dependency stories? Like all these rehabs are now having Kratom departments. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I work like my podcast. I make it with the guy who owns a Kratom company. So I'm like, and he's very, very sensitive. He was actually a student of Carl Hart.
Yeah, we had Carl Hart on the show, and he almost didn't understand opiate addiction. We could not link up because he can use heroin recreationally. Mm-hmm. It was almost as that he denied heroin addiction.
Right. Yeah, he's very he represents an extreme end of the spectrum. And so this guy that I work with, Soren Shade, he's like very Carl Hart pilled, and he's very very like this is social stigma associated with these things. I'm not like opposed to this view. I think I'm a little bit more like I agree that opiophobia is a problem and that it is maybe out of hand. At the same time, I do, and I think that this kind of like elitism where people are like, well, I use psychedelics. That's so much more sophisticated than these horrible junkies. Like I hate that stuff. But at the same time,
do you not say kratom because you think it sounds too pretentious now?
Yes,
I knew it. I knew it because you said I heard you say that kratom is the Thai word for kratom.
It is,
and it's the right word. But you so don't want to be pretentious. I appreciate that about you.
Yeah. I'm not trying to.
I love that.
I'm not trying to put on airs about this kind of thing. And at that time, I was in Thailand. I was talking to Thai people about it, so I think my pronunciation had shifted to accommodate.
But I don't think kratom was as ubiquitous then. You know what I mean? Like I just think it's sweet. I like your anti-pretension stance.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like correct people.
Right.
It's horrible. So, so like I don't like this sort of elitism. At the same time, I think it's necessary to acknowledge that there is something about opioids that is dangerous, really, if you want to get to the heart of it, because they have a tendency to kill people, right? That's what really is the difference. Sometimes I was talking with someone and they're like, wow, benzos are so insidious and so terrible, yet no one talks about it. It's like, yeah, because they don't tend to kill people. That's it. That's what it all comes down to.
It's crazy, though. I had such a bad benzo dependency for a long period of time, and I was having lots and lots of seizures. And I've lost lots of memory from my benzo dependency. I never almost died from it, but I've lost like many years of my life because I don't remember what happened.
Oh yeah, of course.
That's kind of like death. Memory death is a lot like death.
Oh yeah. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot to be said, but I think death is
much worse than memory death.
Death is a big deal.
Yeah,
it is the biggest deal, and so. When you think about our social attitudes toward these things and people say, what's the deal with opiophobia? Well, that's the deal. The deal is death.
People don't want to die and they don't want their kids to die and their spouses to die. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about pink cocaine or 2CB? Or are they the same thing?
I would gladly talk about it. I'll get into it. Yeah. This was actually something that I'd considered making part of the third season of my show as far back as 2020, something like that, when we were in pre-production, because at that point it was still largely and exclusively South American phenomenon. So we actually had like a group of fixers in Brazil that were investigating it. And at that time, the idea was that it was 2CB, that 2C is 2CB. And for those that don't know, this is spelled TUCI as opposed to 2CB, which is number 2, C-B with the...
Explain the difference to me real quick.
Well, okay, just for anyone that cares, the 2C and 2C stands for 2-carbon, which is referring to the side chain to differentiate it from a...
don't mind me, I just don't want to lose that.
Yeah, to differentiate it from a amphetamine, like DOM is an amphetamine.
Right.
So this was Shulgin's nomenclature that he used to describe compounds. Shulgin created 2CB, and it was a really beautiful discovery. And 2CB is a really amazing substance. Most people that try it like 2CB.
What's the experience?
At lower doses, it tends to be a very visual, very warm psychedelic experience. It has a somewhat short duration. At higher doses, it has the capacity to be tremendously visual and frightening. Actually, some of the most, even though it has this reputation for being gentle and inviting, one of the most frightening psychedelic experiences of my life is with 2CB. So
what happened?
There's a whole long story, but what happened was I was working on a project that was about these Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I read about that.
And who had like...
The Magic Jews.
Yeah. So this was a long time ago. I was probably 20 when I was doing this. And they went really, really hard. They really... I can't keep up with a lot of these people. They're on a level that's so different from me. And they were... they used huge amounts of ketamine and LSD. And I'd taken LSD with them. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to have a huge tolerance because I just took LSD. But I wanted to take 2CB the next night. Again, this is all like... I would never... This is a relatively extreme pattern of use for me. I don't think I
No, this is good for our show, though. Yeah.
Subsequently, I'm not like the type to do these things on consecutive days. But I had also, because psychedelics produce a very rapid tolerance where it's difficult to use them on consecutive days because you, even after maybe like 3 or 4 days, you become totally desensitized to them. It's one of the reasons that you can't really become addicted to a psychedelic.
It's like these guys who trip for a month or something. By the end, they're not even feeling.
They're not even tripping. You're desensitized completely. So I overestimated the tolerance. It does exist, but after one use is maybe not enough. So I thought I would be totally insensitive to the 2CB because I'd taken LSD the previous day, and I snorted it. I also underestimated how much more potent it is when you snort it. I mean, it's really pretty much twice as potent when you snort it. So if you have to cut the dose in half, like you can't mess around. And so I snorted close to 20 milligrams, maybe even actually 20 or maybe even slightly more than 20. And it was absolutely terrifying. I mean, it was really, really, really very frightening. And I thought that I was dying. I thought, not only did I think that I was dying, I thought that I was being arrested for dying.
And what was really happening?
I was having hallucinations of flashing police lights.
And what were the Hasids doing? They were just around?
No, I was actually just with a friend. This is This is after a night with the Hasids. I then was at a place, weirdly in the bathroom of that place, the Turkey's Nest on the edge of McCarran Park. I don't know if that place even still exists, but it was a kind of, and it was the whole vibe right off the bat was very bad. Like I remember I came out of the bathroom and I knew that I knew immediately that it was too much. And like this like woman looks at me in like a very kind of like horrifying way, and she's like, somebody did too much coke, and I remember thinking like, you don't even understand. Yes. Like you don't know the first thing about what has happened to me. Like it's nothing to do with cocaine. Right. And but it was really frightening. It also resolved itself relatively quickly, and then the moment that I realized that I wasn't actually dying, it shifted from being nightmarishly frightening to gloriously life-affirming, and I walked the entire night going to bodegas and buying fruit and eating fruit and just like reveling. Now
I'm healthy and alive.
Yeah, like reveling in my gratitude to be alive. So the experience actually was very, very, very positive, and I think this is one of the paradoxes of these psychedelic experiences is in order to get to that level of positive experience, you have to also have
to go through it.
Extremely challenging, frightening, essentially near-death experience. Not to say that I'm recommending anybody do that, obviously, but I don't think it's a coincidence that many of what felt like the most life-affirming and therapeutic experiences had a component where before the good part, I thought I was dying.
Sure. And so where is the 2CB now? Like what's like is that on trend? Is that something that people are messing with more?
So then I mean this is also convoluted and also emblematic of how like nonsensical the market is, but there had been some desire for 2CB. It was recognized to be like a that people wanted to take. Then it started to emerge in South America. They dyed it pink for whatever reason. Then it was 2C-TUCI. Then because anytime you give a name that isn't a representation of a chemical, there's no incentive for it to be anything, right? It's like
it can be itself.
Yeah, like ecstasy is not necessarily MDMA. Ecstasy is like the pill that you buy that could be it could be caffeine, could be methamphetamine, but it's ecstasy.
Right.
And that's kind of like 2C was the equivalent evolution.
The brand name of this pure
2CB becomes 2C. In the same way that MDMA became ecstasy. And so most of the 2C is not 2CB. It's like a mixture of ketamine with MDMA, with cocaine, with like pink Tums, with, whatever else.
Well, how often are people doing it in your understanding then just think it's pink coke though? Like why are they calling it pink cocaine? Or is that something different?
They don't know. Most people don't even really care. This is the other thing that's like hard for me to get is like how much people don't care. And the thing about it is it's like this isn't some nerdy thing. This is like your own experience. This is your own health. This is like if you're doing it to get high, your experience will be better if you know what you're doing. And like there are, in addition to fentanyl test strips and things like that, there's a company called Kaikion Analytics where you can just send samples in the mail to them and they'll test things. And people really like the fact that our culture doesn't embrace analysis is another one of these things that's just making all this stuff so much more dangerous.
Well, that's because addicts can't be sending the sample away because they have to wait for the results. They need to just do the when they have it.
Yes.
I can't imagine having something and sending it away to find out what it is. I can't even imagine that experience. Like, I cannot imagine that experience.
Well, it should be imagined. It should, because there's, you could even say to your dealer, like, hey, why don't you start sending the stuff? Maybe they would lie to you. I don't know, if you trust them, you could say, like, this would be good for everyone if you start sending off the every new batch, send it off to this company, and then we pay this very little money. It's like $20.
Okay, so where can they send it to? Any dealers in the Dopey Nation, send your where can they send them?
Go to Kykeon, KYKEON Analytics, ANALYTICS.com, and you can, I think it's like €20. It's in Spain. You put the sample in an envelope, you send it off. You can select how much analysis you want. They have NMR, LCMS, IR. They have lots of different stuff that you can select from, and then you get back a report on the chemical identity of the sample that you sent them. And this is a really good way to protect yourself, not just from fentanyl, but to actually know what you're consuming.
Know what you're taking.
Yeah.
I heard you talk about Ibogaine as a potentially engineered plant chemical. It's so interesting and it's so advanced that it almost seems like it was engineered.
Yeah, I said that. I mean, plants are amazing and fungi are amazing at creating these things. Like it is beautiful what these plants have evolved to create, and it is a hard molecule to synthesize, and it's an amazing substance. But I don't know that it's like, maybe I was giving it a bit too much credit there.
Why?
Because plants, I mean,
all plants are incredible.
Yeah. I mean, just like B12 is, an incredible structure. It's not produced by plants.
Cauliflower is really incredible. It's delicious.
Yeah. Cauliflower is also amazing.
It's delicious.
I mean, all this stuff is amazing. That's the thing. It's like, I don't want to like single out Ibogaine as extraordinarily amazing in this proliferation of amazingness that is the natural world.
I heard you tell a story about a friend of yours who went to the Netherlands to do it. Could you tell that story, because it really kind of freaked me out?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big part of these experiences is that there is a huge psychological element. So sometimes people talk about Ibogaine from a purely biochemical perspective, where they say, oh, it releases GDNF or BDNF, or it activates or interacts with this subtype of nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, or it's the NMDA antagonist activity or serotonergic activity or whatever. And it's like, sure, those are all components, I would assume, but also there's an experience. And I see this so much with psychedelics, where it's the times where there is this really remarkable experience that you get the therapeutic effect. It's not like a mystery. Like, you see it actually, you work through something. And so this friend of mine had become really addicted to a few different opioids, heroin. He was also addicted to tianeptine. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Sure.
And he was taking absurdly large quantities, like grams of tianeptine every day. And he'd gone to the Netherlands to take Ibogaine, and had entered this sort of delirium after consuming it, where he didn't really know where he was, and he started going through withdrawal, and it was really, really bad. And he was like freaking out, looking for heroin to deal with the withdrawal. And he decided, like, fuck this. I know I did all of this and everything, but I just can't take it. I've got to do heroin. And he like finds a bag of heroin in his bag, takes the heroin, is overwhelmed with this horrifying regret and shame that he allowed himself to be so weak after traveling to the Netherlands and investing all this money and doing so much, and he still couldn't control himself, and he had no hope, and this is his fate. And then suddenly he realized this was like all a dream, essentially, that he dreamed his own relapse and the horror of it, and this helped him not actually relapse in reality.
It's like the ultimate like therapeutic value of Ibogaine. Like that story freaks me out.
Yeah.
Because it's like how the plant, the whatever you want to say, gets into you and actually deals with your addiction.
Yeah.
In this really trippy way. And the spiritual aspect of psychedelics in general, like when you talked about the Shulgins who talked about people coming together, like how much of that affects you, like that there is this one pervasive thing among psychedelics, and it's to be one in general, like the idea of everything being connected. How interested in that are you?
I'm very interested in it cautiously, because I think that, if you start saying, oh, psychedelics, they make people good, or they're going to change people's character, there's so many exceptions. Like, obviously that's not the case. There's so many people. This is like the joke that people have been making forever, that like, oh, they cause ego death, and why are there all these egotistical assholes that use psychedelics, right? So clearly they don't make you a good person, or like taking them won't result in world peace or ending all war or something like that. So that's one reality that you have to contend with. The other reality that I have to contend with is my personal experience with these things that has been very positive, and I believe has changed me for the better. Although I don't have a control version of myself that I can reference and say, oh yeah, things are definitely better. It is my impression. And a lot of that comes from, in my experience, I'm like a somewhat cynical person, and often when I take a psychedelic, I have this it's like fortune cookie type platitudes that I would normally never even think about, like, be the change you want to see in the world, something like that.
And all of a sudden you're like, holy shit.
It's like, oh my God, that's it. Be the change you want to see in the world. That is it. That's the answer. And I can feel that very, very strongly and genuinely, and really, really understand, like, that is it, in fact. And that is valuable for me. That's very valuable, is to be able to experience those sorts of ideas in a visceral way that is otherwise difficult for me to access. It's not spiritual. It's not even like necessarily revelatory. It's almost the opposite direction. It's like allowing yourself to recognize the obvious.
It's so beautiful, though. It's like when you strip away the cynicism with the psychedelic, you're like, be the change, and like you want to be that person. It's like somebody like you or me, like, to strip away cynicism is like the greatest gift that we can get.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Like my cynicism is, like I'm supposed to be working like this super spiritual program to be in recovery, and I'm this ridiculous cynic about everything.
Yeah.
And I know that when I engage in in that spiritual side, and when I try to let go of all these ideas that everybody's an idiot that believes this or that says this, I'm much better off. And it sounds like for you, when you do get into that psychedelic groove, you can strip away some of your cynicism.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
When's the last time you tripped?
It's been a while, actually. I've used small amounts of DMT, but it's been a while.
Do you have like a lot of DMT in your apartment? Like if I went over there,
God, what kind of a question is that?
Can I like eat a little DMT?
Oh man, I mean, I think it is. It's something that allows you to have a psychedelic experience without dedicating a day to it.
Not a lot of investment.
Yeah, which is, I think, good for some people. It's very versatile in that way. But yeah, it's been a while actually since it may have even been 2 years or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is it on the calendar, the next one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking about how best to use these experiences. I also want to orient them in the most constructive possible way, where, I see obviously in the scheme of problematic patterns of use, psychedelics are typically not even a blip on the radar. It's just not really a thing. Not to say that problems don't emerge, they do, but it's so minor compared to other things. And if anything, I think they tend to be beneficial for a lot of people. Obviously not always, but there are things, weird relationships that people can develop with psychedelics. Like, I have a friend, one of my oldest friends, and he's a member of the Santo Daime ayahuasca church in Hawaii. And he's growing up, he's like one of the smartest people I knew, had enormous potential to do all sorts of things. And he had some family difficulties and kind of got off track with a lot of things. And I was talking to him, and he kept saying these things like, well, I just need to go to the Amazon and have, that mind-blowing ayahuasca experience, and that's going to that's going to put me on track to really start doing the thing. And when I hear people say things like that, it always worries me a little bit, because at the end of the day, it will always be you that has to do the thing. So if you're depending on the to put you in the place to get on track to do the thing,
it's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen. It's not the way things work. Like, the ultimate revelation, I think, from these psychedelics is often the recognition that it is now your turn.
It's time to do the work.
Yeah, to do the work.
I have a friend who was near suicidal, and he had done ayahuasca and Ibogaine, and he was sure that when he did Ibogaine, he didn't do it right. Like, he had gotten all these messages, and it showed him everything he had done wrong, and all he wanted to do was have another shot at it to get it right. You know what I mean? And he would text me, novels of his suicidal ideation. And then all that changed is he met some woman and he started to enjoy his life, and now he's not suicidal. He wants to eat mushrooms all the time. And he's really interested I think he would be very interested in your research and what you do, because he's not a addict and he wants connectivity through psychedelics. But he found a way to do the work without needing the Ibogaine to do the work for him.
And that's also not to say that, like, I think there are instances where maybe, these experiences could be beneficial, or they could put someone on track. It's all complicated. I think I'm talking about a kind of like a larger pattern of, if you're always assuming that it's going to be the that puts you, and this even applies to things as simple as Ritalin for ADHD. Like, I think people can get into this pattern where they're like, oh yeah, the Ritalin, it's like no drug will ever do the work of any kind for you. At the end of the day, it's always going to be you that has to achieve these things, and at best can facilitate something that you're doing on your own. So
I get it. In 12-step meetings, people are like, you don't have, just bring the shovel and God will move the mountain. And it's like, no, dude, you have to fucking move the mountain. You know what I mean? It's like, that's the kind of shit that you hear in 12-step meetings. And it's the same kind of thing. If I only take Ritalin, then I'm going to be able to write my dissertation, or I'm going to be able to accomplish this. It's the same kind of thing. It's interesting. I know I've kept you a long time, and I appreciate your patience. All right, I feel good about this. Do you feel good about this?
Yeah.
All right, you want to play my quick game before you go?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, it's this or that. Is there anything you want to say that you didn't say? Or anything that you're interested in talking about that you haven't talked about in a while?
Maybe more recently, it's like the DEA has been moving to prohibit all these psychedelics, and I covered it extensively on my podcast, and it's free for anyone on patreon.com/Hamilton Morris if people want to
say that slowly.
Patreon.com/Hamilton Morris to learn about the DEA's effort to prohibit these psychedelics and how you can get involved to prevent the further prohibition of psychoactive, which is...
Why do you think they're coming after it?
The paranoid answer would be that they're trying to hobble psychedelic research because it's a threat to the moron. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It could just be random. I mean, I covered this hearing at the DEA in a lot of detail on my podcast. Every day I'd go to the hearing. You couldn't record anything, so I'd take handwritten notes and then read them. So it's like 5 hours of me reading handwritten. Or I took 40,000 words of handwritten notes during this hearing, and it was insane. I mean, it's like one of these that they're trying to prohibit, they actually weren't able to provide any kind of irrefutable evidence that a human being had ever even used it. Like, this is how obscure the stuff is. Stuff that not only is it not addictive, not only is it not a threat to public health, they're not even certain that a human being has ever consumed these, and they're still trying to place them in the most controlled status, despite them being very valuable for addiction research. So this is like where the paranoid interpretation comes from.
What is that?
DOI.
And the DEA has reclassified it?
They have been trying to now for a couple of years, and this hearing was an effort to prevent them from doing that.
What's the anti-addiction benefit?
I mean, this is, when people talk about the anti-addictive effects of psychedelics, they usually only talk about Ibogaine, but there's evidence for an anti-addictive effect in other psychedelics. Psilocybin is being investigated for smoking cessation. There's a long history of LSD research and alcoholism. So this isn't an Ibogaine specific effect. It actually does seem like many different psychedelics have an anti-addictive effect, and DOI was one of these psychedelics that was being investigated for that purpose.
Okay. Check out Hamilton's Patreon. It's free on Patreon.
These ones are free.
Yeah, so tell them again, because I want you to get some people to listen.
Oh, yeah. It's the first parts of the hearing are free, and then if you're interested, you can pay $5 and listen to more stuff.
And how was getting high with Joe Rogan?
It was good.
It was fun?
Yeah, he's cool.
He was like really saying that first time you got out of body high, was you that high with him? He must have been very high.
I think we were both high. He had just come back from like Brazil or something and was jet lagged, and the whole thing was like a kind of surprising, because he like wrote me like a Facebook message. Like the whole thing was like weird to me. I was like, oh wow, Joe Rogan is like,
he likes you.
Yeah, it was nice. You know, that's why I think he's like he's criticized endlessly, but I think he's a cool guy. And so it was fun. I mean, I think he's like he likes weed.
He loves fucking DMT and shit.
Yeah, he loves, which is important. I mean, now it's normalized, but there was a period where if you like search DMT on YouTube, it was like you could learn about it from Joe Rogan and pretty much nobody else.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Did you ever drop liquid LSD in your eyes?
No.
Do you wish you had?
I don't wish that I had. I suppose I could if I ever developed the desire.
Did you ever lie on your side and smoke opium out of a long pipe?
No, I've never done that.
Did you wish you did?
Maybe.
What? Give us one great using thing that you got to do that's very, very special.
I mean, well, this is not a great using thing, but this is a great synthesizing thing.
Okay.
I got to synthesize the psychedelic in Alexander Shulgin's lab, which was like a really amazing thing. Yeah.
Did he take you under his wing and
No, this was actually recently because his lab is still there. So
how does that happen?
I was invited to.
It's like being John Mayer and playing Jerry Garcia's guitar or something.
That's it. Yeah, that's a good analogy. It was Anne Shulgin's daughter was kind enough to invite me to do it, to make a sort of documentary piece about some of the research that had happened in the lab, and it was filmed, and the substance was not a controlled substance, and that was like a really wonderful experience for me because he wanted it to be a research facility where people continue to do chemistry, not to just sit unused forever. So I felt that was a nice experience.
Right on. And what about ketamine treatment? What's your take on that?
I have complicated feelings about it, where I'm cautious and somewhat skeptical, but at the same time, when other people start to criticize it, I don't like that either.
Right.
It's a weird feeling where, I think that the way people dealt with the death of Matthew Perry was destructive and dangerous. I think the way that people deal with most overdose deaths is like extremely destructive and dangerous.
Do you think that set back ketamine a lot, Matthew Perry's death?
I think it may have. I'm not sure.
I didn't even think of that, but I think it did.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, in forensic toxicology, there's a distinction made between toxicity and behavioral toxicity. So, for example, if you get drunk and drive and crash into a wall, you wouldn't call that an alcohol overdose. That might be some behavioral toxicity associated with driving while intoxicated.
Right.
So Matthew Perry drowned while he was under the influence of several different including ketamine. So drowning is what killed him. So the lesson is not that ketamine is dangerous necessarily. It is under some
But if somebody
circumstances.
crashed their car drunk, it would be drunk driving.
Yeah.
It would be because you were drunk while you were driving, not just you crashed your car.
But no one would say, and that is like
an alcohol overdose.
Effect. Yeah, an alcohol overdose.
But they would be like, you can't be drinking. I bet you ketamine in hot tubs might be a risk.
Oh, it is. Yeah. If the lesson being extracted from this is don't do ketamine in water, I think that's a very valuable lesson, and I agree with it completely. Yeah, but if the lesson is that ketamine is intrinsically dangerous because Matthew Perry drowned while under a cocktail of different, that is, I think, a less constructive lesson. I don't think that really helps people. And actually, oddly enough, even in the 1970s, during the peak of PCP's popularity, a surprising number of the deaths were drowning as well. So this does seem to be a thing where people are like attracted to bodies of water and then drown while under the influence of dissociatives. It's more common than you would expect.
That is interesting. And I also noticed how interested in PCP you are.
Yeah, I'm very interested.
Why are you so interested in PCP?
Because I think it's I think people, including people that like users, are so easy to manipulate. And I think PCP was a kind of a grand manipulation that was used to justify a lot of police brutality. Because when you frighten people, and this is the current incarnation of this, of course, is fentanyl, but when you frighten people enough, you can use these in almost any way that you want. So, there's a big case, totally forgotten now. There's a biochemist named Richard Burkholder who's making not PCP, but a closely related called PCPR and PCPY, sorry. And he took too much, got naked, was walking around LA, and this cop sees him naked, and he's like a skinny, nerdy guy, and shoots him to death. And this was like a really big police brutality case, and the defense was like, well, he was on PCPY, which they at that time called PHP, as another historical detail. And of course they had to kill him. Of course, I mean, this guy was nuts.
He was out of his mind.
He was out of his damn mind. What are you going to do? So you create this, and law enforcement would distribute these informational booklets that would talk about superhuman strength. They can't be stopped by bullets. They can tear a police car door off its hinges. They can break handcuffs, right? So you disseminate that type of information. It scares the shit out of people. And to make things worse, it was maybe partially true because PCP is an anesthetic. So if you shoot someone who's under the influence of an anesthetic, they're not going to feel that pain. So there's a hair of truth behind. They're not able to pull. They don't have superhuman strength. They're not able to pull car doors off their hinges any more than anybody else. But they are less sensitive to pain, and this freaks people out. And then suddenly, well, what are you going to do? You've got a crazy PCP guy. You got to kill him. You've got to kill him. So this kind of PCP was not associated with violence anymore, if anything, far less than something like alcohol. But this idea that PCP was this horrible thing. I mean, same thing with Rodney King. Like you say, oh, they're under the influence of PCP. Suddenly, the police brutality is justified. And
so with him, it was crack, though, right? That was the myth.
I think PCP was in his system as well.
Okay.
And like this would have, if the killing of George Floyd hadn't been recorded, it would have absolutely been the same deal. If you look at the actual words that they're using while they're killing him, it's all about drugs. It's all
he's high on he's crazy.
And the other guy saying, "Don't do kids. This is why you don't do right."
So we can kill you if you do.
Yeah. So that's the whole thing. Like guaranteed. If that hadn't been recorded and hadn't been the spectacle that it would have just been like, yeah, this guy overdosed on and he was crazy on the we restrained him and he overdosed tragically. The end. That would have been the end of that story. So the have they've been a very powerful tool for justifying police brutality. They frighten people. They are I think that PCP and a few other have been tools of propaganda that have been effectively integrated into our culture in such a way that people really believe it. Like people really think that there's something crazy about PCP.
Yeah, I was scared. I did every in the world and I was scared to do PCP.
Yeah, but PCP is like fine.
How much PCP have you smoked?
Not much, but I've snorted it once and smoked it once.
And how about PCP, formaldehyde, all that shit? Is that real?
I don't think it's again, this is like kind of like the 2C thing, pink cocaine, where as soon as you start
as soon
as you start to use these imprecise or chemically imprecise terms to describe something, it becomes very hard to orient it. Like, so maybe someone somewhere was actually selling formaldehyde, maybe,
right?
But it shouldn't. I mean, formaldehyde, I don't even know that it can be smoked. It's like usually in solution with water, which would be hard to smoke, and then it's like a very flammable gas. Like, I don't know that it's even possible to smoke formaldehyde.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I was in college, and these very attractive girls were smoking a bowl in a field, and I figured they were smoking weed, and I was like, oh, can I get a hit? And they were like, it's PCP, and I was like, no thanks, and I walked away. And I've regretted it ever since. But what was your favorite psychedelic you ever did?
Don't have a favorite.
Okay, here's our game. You ready?
Yeah.
You're going to pick one.
Okay.
It's pretty stupid. Don't expect this to be a high-end game. Yeah. Okay? And I'm not going to be able to read what I wrote. Phenethylene. What is it? What is the word?
Phenethylamine.
Phenethylamine or tryptamine? Just pick.
Just from what perspective?
You just have to pick one. What you like more?
Tryptamine.
Okay, good. Ayahuasca or Ibogaine? Just pick.
Ibogaine.
Very good. Shulgin or Hoffman?
Shulgin.
Kundalini or deprivation tank?
Deprivation tank.
Peyote or DMT? These are hard-hitting questions, right?
This is pretty...
This is high-end stuff. You say DMT.
Yeah.
Over peyote.
Yeah.
Okay. Trey or Jerry?
I am not grateful. That,
just pick one.
Oh, Jerry, I guess.
You pick Jerry. Okay. Brooklyn or Manhattan?
Manhattan now.
Kratom or Salvia?
Salvia, definitely.
John or Paul? You know, John had a little pestum mortar thing, and he would just throw a bunch of in there and grind it up and eat it all day. Yeah, very good. Did you ever have one of those mortar things and just throw in and eat them? No. Sorry, I apologize. HBO or Vice?
I guess HBO.
You hate this game, don't you?
A
little bit.
Confused by it.
You're confused by this game?
Yeah.
It's called This or That.
This or That,
Okay. Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss?
Oh, these are kind of hard.
Hard-hitting questions.
Yeah. I mean, I consider Tim Ferriss like a friend. Like he's someone I talk to. So maybe Tim Ferriss.
That's definitely goes the friend. Meth or Adderall?
Adderall.
Bufotenine or Ultra LSD?
Ultra LSD.
What is Ultra LSD?
It's not even. It's in that case, LSD stands for large scale docking. It's like a method of screening substances.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thai food or Indian food?
Indian food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Ketamine or MDMA? You hate this game.
Yeah.
You're too.
Ketamine.
This game or leaving here. Okay, we're good. Listen, Hamilton. Thank you so much for coming.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Did you have a good time?
I did. Yeah,
you did?
Yeah, it was great.
Here and there, you had fun?
I had fun throughout. Yeah, it was a good conversation.
But the game, not so much.
I'm not sure about the rules of the game.
The rules you just picked.
Okay, then I guess I did all right.
What about Namaste at Home, Dad?
She's funny.
How did you wind up with her on? She hates me now.
No.
She hates me because I hired her to run my social media, and then I would pester her about posting stuff, and she got really angry at me.
Oh. I mean, she was. I was living in Philly for a while. She's a Philly, or used to be a Philly person.
She was in our first Dopey con. She's hysterical.
Yeah.
We love Namaste at Home, Dad.
Yeah, she's very funny.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for coming, Hamilton. I appreciate it.